Alright everybody, how we doing today? Final video for today. And it says, from Reason.com, free minds and free markets. California's restrictive gun laws still can't prevent shootings. Instead of reducing the dangers posed by criminals, California's gun restrictions have increased the threat posed to decent people by the law itself. California has the gun law that restrictionists say they want. Universal background checks? Yes, indeed. Assault weapon ban? Through tighter iterations, you bet. Registration? Red flag law to strip guns from the hands of maybe potentially dangerous people for several years now and toughened just last month. These are dream laws for anti-gunners around the country, and yet they didn't stop Nathaniel Burhue from murdering 2 people and injuring 3 others before shooting himself at Saugus High School in Santa Clarita, California. Earlier this month, instead of being stymied by legal restrictions, the killer worked around them. Yeah, because when was the last time criminals obeyed the law? But for starters, Burhau wasn't supposed to have guns according to the law. As a 16-year-old, he's too young to possess, let alone purchase handguns in California. Mark Burhau, the shooter's late father, was a hunter and did own guns, but they were taken away from for some reason before the man's death in 2017. The father had 6 guns registered to him, Los Angeles County Sheriff Alex Villanueva says. Ultimately, at one point, all the weapons were lawfully removed from the home and he became a prohibited possessor. The guns were subsequently destroyed, legally, and he had no access to weapons at that point further. That is how Burhau Sr.'s guns were taken away, just as the state's red flag laws might dictate. Although we don't know the specific legal authority or the reason for the confiscation, where then did the 1911-style 45 caliber handgun used by Nathaniel Burhau in his killing spree originate. When we did a search of the house, we encountered what's called a kit gun. Villanueva elaborates. The weapon used in the homicide was also a kit gun. It was assembled from parts that had no serial number, so it was not called a ghost. So it's what was called a ghost gun. Yeah, surprise, surprise. Criminals don't obey the law. The basic idea behind gun regulation, if you apply a little bit of syllogism, does actually become logically sound until you reach a certain point. For example, this is a syllogism. Hurting people is bad. Guns hurt people. Therefore, guns are bad. Is a perfectly logical statement. However, as they proceed, their logic stops right where they would get to this point. Bad people will try to hurt you with guns. Hurting people stops people from doing things. Ergo, hurting a bad person that's trying to hurt you is good. It's a perfectly logical statement. Someone's trying to hurt you, then you stop them from hurting you by hurting them before they can hurt you. It's called self-defense. For whatever reason, their logic is perfectly sound right up until that point. What's causing that block? I'll tell you what's causing that block. Emotion. Oh my god, guns are scary! No, no, no! And it doesn't help that the sensationalist media comes in and continues to perpetuate the attitude ad infinitum. Or I should say more like ad nauseum. It's not truly infinite. But ghost gun means a gun that doesn't have a serial number and presumably a commercial source. Some are made completely from scratch, based on widely available plans. The machinery required for the job is commonly used for all sorts of projects, although CNC machines and 3D printers are making it even easier. Other guns come, as this pistol apparently did, from part kits that can be used to repair or upgrade compatible firearms. The receiver, the core component that is legally defined as a gun, is regulated at the federal level. But given that there's an inescapable difference between something that is a working firearm and material that might eventually be turned into a working firearm, a line must be drawn somewhere. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Explosives currently defines that line as 80% completion. The ATF has long held that items such as receiver blanks, castings, or machined bodies in which the fire control cavity area are completely solid and unmachined have not reached the stage of manufacture which would result in a classification of firearm, the Bureau says. That means people can purchase unfinished 80% receivers free of regulation and finish them in their own workshops, which may be how Burhau's pistol was made. Kit guns and ghost guns aren't news to California lawmakers. They were subject to background checks and registration in 2016, although that law has unsurprisingly proven unenforceable. The state government passed new regulations on them last month. Going forward, gun parts are subject to regulations much as if they were finished firearms. Even gun control advocates concede the law is rather impotent. Even after the law goes into effect, pre-existing guns without serial numbers will remain hard to trace, and some new guns made from parts will likewise be difficult to trace. Not everyone will apply for a serial number, even though it's legally required. James William Gibson complained in the Los Angeles Times, the people who buy a given model of a precursor part but who do not call and get a serial number can be identified, but it will still take time to trace a particular gun. Additionally, the new law just sidesteps the problem with which the federal ATF has wrestled. Short of regulating all metal and plastic that might be made into a gun, where does the law stop? California legislatures targeted an unfinished receiver and an unfinished handgun frame, then kicked the issue over to the bureaucrats, telling them the Department of Justice, consistent with this section, it shall provide written guidance and pictorial diagrams demonstrating each category of firearm precursor part specified. Is it a gun? Is it a block of metal? This should be interesting. Real quick, I just want to remind you that these laws are technically unconstitutional and therefore illegal. Politicians passing illegal laws. But they can do it because the only thing stopping them from doing it would be the Supreme Court. But many of the states, because if you do it at the state level, if you pass the laws at the state level, then you do not have to pass the Supreme Court. If you try to do this nationwide, it would be rendered illegal and you couldn't do it. See, that's the loophole. It's a legal loophole. These gun restrictions are technically unconstitutional and illegal. California is functionally its own country at this point because of how many loopholes they've used to establish their far left legislation, and they even act like it too. And it's a country that's failing. The California Republic ain't no more. Now that they've got medieval diseases like frickin' leprosy making a comeback and forest fires like you wouldn't believe because of their policies. And I'm worried that they're going to come here and try and institute that shit in Washington. Please don't come here. Pinko, go home. But nonetheless, at the same time, California implemented a farther-reaching red flag law intended to deny the illegal possession of firearms to those deemed to be potentially dangerous. The original law was already draconian, leaving lawmakers little room to double down. They did the only thing left to them. They gutted the remains of due process that prompted the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, to object that stripping rights away from the subject of restraining orders without giving them an opportunity to argue their cases poses a significant threat to civil liberties. Yes, it does. Remember the Burhow family's guns that were taken away before the new law ever passed? That couldn't stop the home manufacture of new guns without regard for the law. California is running up against a serious and common challenge. Laws are effective at defining the penalties that you apply to people who get caught doing something you don't want them to do, but not at all that effective at changing the behavior of those who are unlikely to be caught or don't care about consequences. You can pass a legislative wish list and then tighten it forever. Much human conduct will remain beyond reach. Fortunately, as horrifying as Nathaniel Burhow's crime was, it remains rare in a remarkably safe country. For the second consecutive year, the estimated number of violent crimes in the nation decreased when compared with the previous year's statistics. In 2018, violent crime was down 3.3% from the 2017 number, the FBI noted in September. That's because they try and blow these things up and make them into bigger deals. The fact that we even know about Nathaniel Burhow is because the media has given so much attention to these sorts of things. Mass shootings are very uncommon. It's an obvious attempt at trying to take away the people's guns, because an unarmed population is a population you can do anything to. Anyway, using the FBI numbers, the violent crime rate fell 51% between 1993 and 2018. Using the BGS data, the rate fell 71% during that span. That is from Pew Research. Barhouse crime occurred against the backdrop of an America whose people are far less at risk of violence than they were in the past. That doesn't make the crimes less evil or the frustrations less immediate, especially for victims and their families, but laws have victims too. As the ACLU points out with regard to California's tightened red flag law, laws made ever more draconian in response to crimes that resist efforts at deterrence will inevitably harm the innocent more than they touch the predators. Excuse me. When cops are sent to the impossible, bad tips are submitted, raids are mistargeted, and lives are ruined or ended. California has adopted every law gun restrictions have demanded, but instead of reducing the dangers posed by criminals, it has increased the threat posed to decent people by law itself. Because decent people no longer have any guns with which to protect themselves. And statistically speaking, you cannot even begin to rely on the police for your defense. In many cases, they're not even legally obligated to protect you, and a lot of the time, they won't even bother. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. It is not a fallacy, it is the truth. You just don't want to hear it because you're recoiling. Guns are scary! Read my lips, snowflake, and read 'em good. Shall not be infringed. Your gun control laws are unconstitutional and illegal. Period. And you're just gonna get people killed. Grow the fuck up. Peace.